Thanks very much, Katrina. I can't pass up the opportunity to say that when I came to this town back in the 1980s, it was her father that had a profound impact on me, because I watched Congressman Frank Wolf, who's in this gathering tonight, Congressman Lantos, Chris Smith, and Tony Hall, who had very different political positions, constantly work together for religious freedom. And I learned from them that it was possible to do what we're trying to do tonight. So thank you, Katrina, for those beautiful words and for the fact this is the 10-year anniversary of your father's passing, and his legacy certainly lives on. It occurs to me, and I was watching the signatories, the third, who were gathered over here, and I watched them try to line up in alphabetical order. And had there not been some young people there who could help these PhDs and rabbis and imams, we would have never gotten it done. And then it struck me that that's pretty much strong evidence that the American Charter, the fact that it's come together and is such an elegant document, makes you think somebody was involved more than just us, which is what we'd like to believe, in fact, was the case. Now, my name is Kent Hill. I'm the Executive Director of the Religious Freedom Institute. And the nice thing about going last and offering some concluding remarks is you don't have to endure a long introduction of me. You've just heard everything you're going to know about me. And even though my brother's in the audience and I could talk about my ping pong prowess, I'm going to leave that aside and just give you some thoughts as we conclude this evening together. You know, I started my career as an historian at a university, Seattle Pacific University in Seattle. I thought I would stay there all my life. I had just been tenured, but I had been involved with the plight of religious believers in the Soviet Union. And 2 or 3 weeks after I was tenured there, I got a call from Washington and said, would you come back and work on religious freedom issues in the D.C. area? And so I thought about it, but we decided, my wife and I decided to move to Washington, D.C., and I never got back to teaching history again. But I never lost my interest in history. And as I thought about the kind of things that I might say at the end of this time together, I could not get out of my mind a poem that will be 100 years old next year. And the poem was written in the wake of the European bloodbath of World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution, and awful things were happening in Ireland. It was a terrible time for Europe. And there was an Irish poet, William Butler Yeats, a somewhat eccentric Irish poet who captured some of the angst and turmoil and confusion of that deeply troubled era. And I've not been able to get that poem out of my mind. I'm just going to cite a few lines from that poem to frame what I want to say in conclusion tonight. This is what Yeats wrote. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are filled with passionate intensity. A century later, living in an America characterized by ever-increasing incivility, general nastiness, confusion, and polarization, many sense some deep truth in Yeats' haunting lament. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. But we have gathered in this place on this night, in this grand rotunda, because in this sacred place we have here the artifacts of principles that our founders believed in, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights. And there was a national consensus on principles which, we must frankly acknowledge, were far too long not applied to African Americans and Native Indian brothers and sisters. But the principles were good. And it's the principles we return to and reaffirm tonight. And surely we're aware that many of our fellow citizens are deeply fearful that the early de facto motto of the United States, e pluribus unum, out of many one, is simply no longer true. Many believe that. They don't always say it, but there's a fear that it may be the case. And yet we, the signatories of the American Charter, proudly reaffirm our belief in and our commitment to the central truths embodied in those great documents, these great documents. And what are the central truths that lie at the heart of the foundational texts in this chamber? What are those core beliefs? First, there is a clear affirmation of who we are as human beings. The American Charter acknowledges that we seek insight into the source of our being and the nature of ultimate reality, and we seek to align our lives with those religious beliefs or those beliefs of conscience. Second, throughout the American Charter, there is a constant reminder of what the preface calls our mutual commitment to the dignity of every human being. And Article 2 makes clear that our human dignity is inviolable. Third, based on who we are as human beings, rooted in our inviolable human dignity, Article 2 makes clear that our human dignity is also a right. It's something that precedes the state. Based on who we are as human beings and rooted in that inviolable dignity, it follows logically that freedom of religion and conscience is a fundamental right for all, regardless of our beliefs. Fourth, the founders were realists. They weren't utopians. Thus, their core beliefs about human beings, their capacity for both good and evil, meant that government had to be limited. And fifth, the founders were ingenious in human history in their profound respect for the role of religion in culture and the state. Let me read to you what you signed tonight from Article 15. Central to the daring of what George Washington called the Great Experiment is the fact that the American Republic rejects any established religion or ideology, but get this, yet relies crucially on the vitality of the ultimate beliefs and values of its citizens. That had never been tried in human history before. It is, of course, an historical fact that America is much more diverse than it was at the time of the founders. A lot more religions, a lot more nuns, and I don't mean the kind that wear habits. And the big question today is, with that kind of diversity, can we still find the common ground necessary to succeed in what the American Charter has set out to try and do? But we, who signed the Charter, say it's worth a try. Verdict is out. This is a tougher sell. This is a tougher challenge in many respects. But if you remember Rabbi Moline's wonderful invocation, he noted that whether one considers one a believer in transcendent truth or just conscience, whatever one's ultimate beliefs are, we have to still believe that the possessor of those beliefs has inviolable human dignity. And our children have to see us interact with people who differ with us in a way that always respects the other's inviolable human dignity. Finally, as we close tonight, the big question is, does this just end up being a nice document on the shelf someplace? The real question is, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? The Charter argues that success depends as much on constitutions and laws. It was said earlier by Charles so wonderfully, that constitutions and laws, though important, will never be enough. And the Charter explicitly addresses this and says, if there is not what Alexis de Tocqueville calls the spirit of liberty and the habits of the heart, we will fail. So, if that is the case, what do we do to secure the success of the enterprise we have committed ourselves to this night? And I remind you that the words of the document we signed include that we must focus on being able to securely transmit from generation to generation through families, schools, and civic education what we affirm in the American Charter. We must engage each other with that civility that I talked about. We must figure out a way to embody in curriculum, in schools, at all levels, the principles in the American Charter. We must help people understand that they can deal with people who are different, the other. We can deal with them with respect and granting them human dignity. As I come to a close here, let me just insert one little fact. What happened tonight could not have happened without an awful lot of work by a lot of people. And I don't dare go into the list of all who were involved here in this particular event, but I do want to note that Carolyn Hoffman was our events coordinator. I'll also mention from our staff, Abby Galvan, Jeremy Barker, Jacob Hawley, Ismail Royer, Jason Miller, and a number of volunteers. And without them, this simply would not have happened. And we want to thank our splendid Master of Ceremonies tonight, Bill Galston. And it's not just what he did tonight. We had a pre-event at the Brookings Institution a few months ago. He was key to that taking place. He's been with us on this journey from the very beginning, and we're so thankful for that. Also, Charles Haynes. None of this would have happened without Charles Haynes. It was Charles Haynes who helped us have the commitment to make sure that that list of signatories was so diverse, nobody could look at it and say something unusual is happening here. That's the work of Charles Haynes. And I've got to mention Brian Walsh on the staff of the Religious Freedom Institute. He worked with Charles and Bill. He's got a legal mind. He was the one that helped negotiate the dozens and dozens of new editions of the American Charter. He helped gain the signatories, and we're very grateful for all you've done here. So as we bring this to a close tonight, I want to remind you of one other thing that was in the Charter. And I quote, "Freedom and its moral and social seedbed will be quickly lost if they are not carefully tended and nourished from one generation to the next." And so with that admonition in mind, let us end our time together tonight with these words from the great Jewish scholar Jacob Neusner. Civilization hangs suspended from generation to generation by the gossamer strand of memory. If only one cohort of mothers and fathers fails to convey to its children what it has learned from its parents, then the great chain of learning and wisdom snaps. If the guardians of human knowledge stumble only one time in their fall, collapses the whole edifice of knowledge and understanding as we take the American Charter forward. It's going to depend on what happens not in Washington, but in the schools throughout this country. And it's going to be reflected in what people around us, particularly our family, our neighbor, our children, see in our own behavior as we interact with those who have different views than we do. So in conclusion, let me say a special thank you to our signatories, to our guests here tonight, and let us remember that the precious legacy of freedom of religion and conscience, which has been bequeathed to us by those who have come before, let us never forget that it can only survive and thrive if each of us does our part to pass on this treasure to the next generation. So good night, and thank you for coming, and I am told you are free to stay for a little bit longer, enjoy some wine and some fellowship, but thank you so much for coming.